Former U.S. President Donald Trump is back in court today as he pushes to have the criminal charges against him tossed out. Trump and his legal team argue that his alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election are covered by presidential immunity, a claim a lower court has already rejected. Jackson Proskow is outside the courthouse in Washington for us. Jackson, great to see you. So let's get caught up. What exactly is Trump's team expected to argue today?
Good morning to you, Anthony. The president's team is expected to argue that he is immune from prosecution for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, both because he was president, but also in their view, the actions he was taking arose from his job as president. In other words, he was trying to protect the integrity of the election, and that falls under his job. This argument has been rejected by the lower court already. It was punted to the Supreme Court, which then sent it back down to this appeals court. Of note today is that Mr. Trump is expected to be in the room himself, and that's something he doesn't have to do, but he has chosen to be here today to appear before this panel of 3 judges that's hearing his case, and all of this signifies just how critical this case is to Mr. Trump's future. Of course, Anthony, we all recall the case against him, the indictment brought against him by special counsel Jack Smith. It centers around his pressure on state election officials, the events that led up to the riot at the Capitol building on January 6th, and these charges that he did abuse his power and try to overturn the will of voters by rejecting the outcome of the 2020 election.
Okay, so a couple of things. How long is this expected to take, and what happens either way if he wins or loses?
So the arguments should be wrapped up fairly quickly this morning. This panel of 3 judges is really just going to weigh about 20 minutes of arguments from each side. If Mr. Trump wins this appeal, it's significant for him because it essentially means that all of these other cases against him that have to do with things with conduct while he was in office effectively are rendered moot. He is given presidential immunity, and so that could be a real win for him. But of course, if he loses, the trial against him, the case brought by special counsel Jack Smith, will proceed. We should also point out, Anthony, that in the state of Georgia, where Trump is facing similar charges of trying to overturn the election in that state, his legal team has mounted a similar appeal, again arguing presidential immunity, arguing that his phone calls to Georgia state officials, pressuring them to overturn the election to find the votes he needed, were in the course of business as president.
But then, of course, the backdrop to all this is the election that is happening this year. And they're already starting in terms of the Iowa caucus. That's coming up very soon. So how could all of this impact what's going to happen?
Well, think of it in these terms. We're 6 days away from the Iowa caucuses, and instead of being on the ground campaigning, Mr. Trump is sitting here in a courtroom, and that's very much going to be the theme for the year ahead, regardless of what happens with this specific appeal. He's got a full dance calendar, as they like to say, with court cases. In fact, his closing arguments in the New York civil trial begin on Thursday of this week. He's expected there as well. And so really, part of Trump's reason for being here in person today, even though he doesn't need to, is because this is now part of his campaign. He can't escape it. And each successive court case, each new round of indictments actually serves to bolster his support within the Republican Party. His supporters are lapping it up. They buy his arguments that he is the victim of political persecutions here. And so for him, it's an important visual to be seen entering and leaving these various courthouses, even though it interferes with his campaign schedule. We should also point out, Anthony, that really when it comes to campaigning, he doesn't need to do much right now. He is far and away the front runner in the Republican race, by some polls 20, 30, 40 points ahead of his closest rivals.
It's free publicity, and that's a win for him. That's at least how he sees it. Nonetheless, a lot to unfold. Look, Jackson, we appreciate this. There's still a lot more to come on this story, of course. That is Jackson Proskow joining us from outside the courthouse in Washington.